hear from Issac Bailey and his important work at this political moment. And I think especially as many of us are focusing on moving beyond the Trump presidency, but also I think it's really important to recognize that the issues that came to surface are not over, right? We can't go back to brunch, even if it was not a pandemic. We just can't go back to brunch and pretend that everything's done. So I hope that's part of our conversation tonight, how to stay engaged, and I'm glad you all are here so we can continue that engagement.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Jamie. I'd also just like to take a moment to thank my co-sponsor, Ashlyn Pro, for being here tonight and for helping us with our event tonight. She is another backbone of Grand Strand Action Together and makes lots of things happen for us. So at this moment, I'd like to introduce our guest of honor tonight, Issac Bailey, who, as Jamie mentioned, is a columnist in Myrtle Beach, but is a nationally known writer. He has held fellowships at Harvard University, at the University of Southern California Annenberg Center, and is also teaching at Davidson College, from what I understand, is professor of public policy at Davidson College. So Issac is, I think you're you're like tri-coastal at this point. You are, you're on all the coast. So we're happy that you're able to join us tonight. And so what we're going to do tonight is I have a series of questions. We're going to invite all of you as the participants in the webinar to contribute. Feel free to write comments in the chat. You can respond to anything I'm saying, anything Issac is saying. Feel free to write any questions that you have. Jamie and Ashlyn are going to keep an eye on that chat. Some of you are joining us from Facebook. So we have another colleague who's going to be monitoring the Facebook chat to see if anybody has comments and questions there. So we're really excited about this opportunity tonight to get to know Issac and to hear more from him. So tonight we are going to be talking to Issac about his book. This is called Why Didn't We Riot? A Black Man in Trumpland. And let me just say, this book is stunning. I was just so impressed, and Issac, I got so many ideas of things I want to write on as a philosopher and as somebody who writes on activism. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a wealth of just such interesting knowledge. Of course, nobody reads my work. I get my 10 colleagues who read my stuff. So at least everybody else is going to be reading your work. So Issac's question is, why didn't we riot? And he gives a number of answers to this question. I came up with a number of questions to ask Issac about his book. And I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of them because I got real excited and came up with a lot of questions. But the themes that I picked up on in his book, just to give you a quick overview of what the answers are for, like, why didn't Black people riot in Trumpland, which is here in Horry County. And I found the answers to sort of hit three areas. Essentially, as Issac explains, Black people don't trust the system. There might be some corruption. There's, a lot of dishonesty, perhaps, in how things are reported in the area. So there's a lack of trust. Another reason that Issac, I'm going to talk more about is Black people are tired of comforting white people and dealing with white fragility. So that's another theme that I was just, that one hit home hard. And then also that there's a sense in which Black people are tired of the effects of racism. And I found that to be also a really, like, it for me, as someone who was raised in, a different skin color, right, under a different set of social norms and standards, that I felt, the sorrow, right, that the Black community has been feeling over the last 4 years, and let's just be frank, maybe 4 centuries. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so I'm going to talk, I'd like to just begin. And again, if anybody wants to add more about this in the chat or feel free to raise your hand. We have a little question and answer section, so feel free to write things in there. So I'd like to start off by asking, my first question is about, Issac has a discussion in his book about Black forgiveness and white comfort. And I found this chapter just to be very, very compelling. So I'll read my question. So the way that you describe this phenomenon of white people needing comfort for their racism seems right to me. It seems that many people of color see white supremacy all day long, but white people are not entirely aware of it. This is a large, I think the best explanation I've heard by this is by a philosopher named Charles Mills. And yet it seems like Black Americans are expected to forgive white Americans over and over and over again, right? So we think about, the Charleston massacre. We think about all the other killings of Black people, and yet we're expected to be forgiven. And my question is, why do you think that this is a phenomenon in the United States? It seems to me that it could be a tool of racial reconciliation. It may be the case that forgiveness is ultimately more effective at, bending the arc of, justice, or to get things to change the future, or is it because it's the only tool available to oppress people, right? It may be the case that we don't really have many other options other than forgiveness. So I'd like for you to just sort of, tell us more about this theme.
Well, yes, and that is a major question. Yes, and I am frankly actually still sort of actually grappling with it myself, and that at least for me, at least a lot of this is actually based in our faith, in Christianity, in particular. Yes, and because the sort of wonderful thing about Christianity is this principle of sort of forgiveness, and sort of even to the folks who wrong you.
Right.
Yes, and also that this was actually taught at least by sort of Jesus himself, of course, in terms of turning the other cheek, etc. Yes, and so that actually is a wonderful concept that can really, really heal all kinds of wounds, and also sort of actually be unifying. It is just that the sort of problem here is that it has been so one-sided. Yes, in terms of that, at least in terms of that, we are almost obligated in order to actually forgive, even when folks actually maim us and kill us even. And yet though that if you actually think back actually to that one example that I put in the book, this actually when that white Dallas cops are actually shot Botham John in his apartment, and actually killed him. Yes, and then that his brother sort of actually got up on the stand and forgave her, and also that that sort of that Black judge sort of actually gave her a hug. He's in the courtroom even.
Right.
Yes. Yes, and then that after that, I sort of actually heard from many of my my white Christian friends that say oh my God, this is such a great, wonderful thing. Oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And yet though that if you actually did this, and yes, and then that say that it was might say that it was Botham John who had actually shot the white cop in a situation like that.
Right.
And yet like under that scenario, like I cannot imagine like any courtroom scene like in which like these sort of that white family like or like the white that cops or judges etc like would have said that I forgive you, and also that like I so like yes 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 like and that like I love you etc.
Right.
And yes yes like and because like that is so hard to envision simply because it almost never happens, like even though again that like we all like are like are something actually called in essence at least by like our faith, like in order to forgive.
Mm. Yeah, I think you make a really good point there that that the tables are not often turned, that you would very rarely see a white family forgiving a Black family in a courtroom, whereas that has happened numerous times, right, in
Yes.
recent years on the part of the Black community. And I
Right.
think it's so interesting what you say about Christianity being such, I think that you're absolutely right. It's such a deep part of like the Black community that Christianity is such like a big influence. And in fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to pick up on that because I had another question about that that you mentioned in the book, which is the racism, which seems to be part of evangelical Christianity.
Right.
And it's interesting that oftentimes, this is a terrible thing to say, but sometimes, you know, professors notice trends and they'll notice the people that seem to be the most sure about all of their answers and all of their views are evangelical Christians, right? That they're just not right. And often about racism too. And you're just like, did you not realize that like you sound racist when you're saying that? So I think I find this fascinating. I grew up in evangelical Christianity and there are wonderful people there. And yet it seems like I don't know, it's very exclusive or something like that. And I have been thinking about this question for the last 3 days. Like, what is it that's part of white Christianity? So you mentioned in your book that you went to a white church here in Myrtle Beach for some time. It sounded like it was
Yes.
one time period. Where do you think we are in this country with respect to Christianity and race? I feel like it's kind of a disaster right now. I know that's a real big question. You could write a whole nother book on that, but what are your thoughts?
Yes, it is a massive disaster right now, frankly. Yes, yes, like, and also that that is actually like one of my sort of my primary struggles, frankly. And because like what I have have like actually had to admit like is that like if this faith was like what I have been taught it really is supposed to be, yes, and then that like there is no way that it actually could have led at least to so many Christians sort of like actually supporting like all of the ugliness, et cetera, bigotry and racism like that we saw like over these past 4 years. Yes, like and also sort of like even before that, yes, yes, like and also sort of and that like here sort of like is the real like uncomfortable reality is that like actually like if you like actually look back like actually throughout our history that yes, in terms of that, like white supremacy and sort of that Christianity, like have like never like actually not like really been at odds overall. Mm-hmm. And that is a really, really bad thing to say. Yes, I mean, but like it was true, like actually during slavery, like it was, yes, like and sort of Reconstruction and Redemption and Jim Crow, like and like the lynching era and like the civil rights era, like which like even that prompted like like that sort of like letter, at least like actually not like from a like Birmingham jail, like actually by King, in order to actually try to get people to see like what exactly was happening. Yes, and yes, and then that my struggle with it like is that I have seen sort of that Christianity sort of actually be that really really strong foundation for sort of like many people like in my family, friends, and also that like it has absolutely like actually helped them get through really 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 tough times, and sort of like actually help them at least to like actually become better people. Absolutely. And yet though, like this same religion, like the same faith, I'm sort of like also sort of like actually convinced a uh uh well yes in terms of a sort of like lot like of our sort of like white my Christian brothers and sisters in order to take a different route like on this issue of race, like even in 21st century America. Yes, and I mean yes, and so I mean yes, and then so like for me like that has been sobering.
Right. Yeah, I totally am with you on that. It's been a challenge, just for me and my family to, and so that my family's kind of split on this issue, but many people that in my family like Trump, but many people absolutely hate Trump. And so there's this move towards like the Christian left, right? Which is, I hope, more of like an emerging thing. But if you look at the history of white Christianity, it is more closely aligned with the right for what, the last, I don't know, 40 or 50 years at least.
Yes. Yeah.
So we can always hope. I mean, I think that maybe there's been some sort of reckoning. Jamie, I don't know. Do you guys talk about this in sociology at all?
Well, I do, specifically, especially in relation to politics around gender and sexuality when it comes to the religious right and the mobilization of the religious right. For much of the history of evangelical Christianity, there was an expectation not to engage in politics, but it was around the feminist movement and the gay liberation movement in the 60s and 70s when those kinds of like really like kind of like intimate personal changes and changes to the family started, that then a lot of evangelical Christians really thought like this is a little bit too far, like this is really changing the fabric of society. So it kind of mobilized a lot of folks. And then politically, a lot of like kind of political officials, elected officials noticed, that this is a large group of people we can mobilize, especially then around abortion rights and the pro-life, pro-choice stuff, which was had not been an issue, again, based on what I've read and studied, had not been an issue until some political entrepreneurs were kind of like, yes, we can mobilize around this and turn this into a voting block. And those social wedge issues, of course, have now continued to mobilize people on religious grounds. And there are connections there to race as well. I posted in the chat that religion is really interesting because it's been both used as a tool of oppression and a tool of liberation, right? So people often try to pigeonhole religion as though, again, depending on one's perspective, that either it's, like this really, great and wonderful thing that cannot be critiqued, or it's something that, like one needs to, like sometimes people bash, people who are deeply religious. But for many people who are religious, like that has been a tool for outreach and for doing good, right? So I think that's really interesting. And I don't know if that's something you want to speak to a little bit more in your experience, if you've already talked about the religion part.
Well, yes, and that my dad is absolutely right. Yes, like, and because like, which is why that I try to get at that like in the book. Yes, and because like here's my thing about this, like, is that like it actually would be a lot easier, like if I can just say that like all these folks were just racist and bad people, like who always did bad things, and so therefore, I sort of like actually had, should not have had like any other expectations for them. And yet, though, in the reality that I've actually seen them do wonderful, wonderful things in big ways and also in small ways. Like, which is why that like my sort of like sense is of betrayal, simply because like my sort of their expectations for them are actually high, simply because I have seen them do really, really good things and like actually stand on that really, really good things. I mean, yes, and then so like therefore that like once I see them do this, and then it's like it's almost like a direct shock, like it is a hurt, frankly. Yes, like and also sort of at least like on like the issue of like abortion, for instance, like which is what you brought up, like I mean yes, and then that like that too, like is like very, very true. Yes, like and also that at least I have like actually heard like that as the sort of my top reason why that it was okay to still be with Trump, et cetera, like all those sort of things. Like, and yet though that if you actually look back through the data like over like the past 50 years, yes, like and then that like if your goal like really like was to actually bring down the abortion rate, for instance, well yes, and then that you sort of actually would be voting for Democrats, not Republicans. Yes, yes, like and because that like we've like actually seen time and time again, yes, in terms of that like all of these healthcare policies and like and sort of especially with like contraceptive coverage and like healthcare planning, like actually for like women and kids, etc. Like it actually stabilizes people more, like which sort of actually which like actually sort of reduces unintended pregnancies, like which like actually like reduces the abortion rate. And so like for me, that even if you just looked at that issue alone and you actually looked at the facts, like you actually looked at the data, I mean, yes, and then that like there is like no good reason, at least for a sort of yes, yes, in terms of at least for a sort of like pro-life Christian, in order to like always vote like actually like for the GOP and men like Trump.
As a sociologist, thank you. I find myself saying a lot, like, if you look at the data,
Yes,
right, we have data on that. Like, it actually shows, like, we can bring down the abortion rate if we do these things, right? But what I've learned over the last several years is many people are not actually interested in the data. So,
yes, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, so there's that. I have a question. If I don't know, Jelena, you can go, or Ashlyn, if you have another question. I don't see anything else in the chat, and this might be more philosophical, actually. But you know, and you can decide if maybe you want to save this till the end or move on to a different question or topic. But you know, one of the things that strikes me has been a conversation that I've had with many people from many different perspectives, but I think especially for people of color, I think especially for Black people specifically, who have been through so much for generations, and how that kind of culminated in the last few years, and massive protests for racial justice, but still people were not indicted just yesterday, in another issue, so I'm thinking of hope, right? And when we think about all of these issues, When we think about what people have gone through, and especially even your personal life history is, like you've been through a lot, as you know, and anyone who would have read this book or any of your other works would have known. So how do you keep hope? And I think of, there's an activist named Miriam Kaba who works on prison abolition, and she says hope is a discipline, and we need to practice every day. And I wonder if you have something to add to that. Like, what is your discipline for hope? Like, how do you practice hope? How do you find hope?
Well, yes, and then that she is absolutely right about that, by the way, for sure. Yes, and that at least for me, like I sort of like always try to remember like that. Like if I don't have like some sense of hope or like some sense of optimism, yes, and then that I am likely to like actually give into bitterness and like actually give into like helplessness. And then so that at least like actually when you get like actually to that state, like of like actually just feeling helpless, yes, and then that yes, and then that that sort of like life is really not worth living at that point, like which is a really, really dangerous state to be in. Yes, like, and also that like if you don't have hope, yes, and then that you are like unlikely, at least to like actually try to keep pushing forward, simply because that you don't think that things can get better. Yes, and it's like therefore that you are like actually just going to accept how things are. Yes, yes. Yes, and like also though that like I think that it is vital, like in order for folks to understand that yes, in terms of that like hope, like is not the same thing as happiness. Like it is not really like it is not like this happy-go-lucky kind of feeling that you have to have, and oh my God, wonderful, flowers and bubbles and roses, etc. Yes, and because like sometimes like I think that my hope is actually sustained like actually by my anger. In fact,
Yeah.
yes, like yeah, yeah, yes, like and because like I know that like if I am still angry, yes, and then so therefore that I can still see that sort of that my change is still necessary, and also that I feel engaged enough that I sort of actually like might be able to do something about it.
It's such a powerful response in that, talking about hope being sustained by anger. I think a lot of people feel like if we have hope, we have to let go of anger, and anger can be useful if it's channeled in the right way. Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
Isaac, I love that. I think that's going to become my new slogan. Hope is sustained by my hope is sustained by my anger. That's pretty much how I feel every day. When I feel my outrage, I'm like, well, gotta keep pressing on.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, great. Ashlyn, did you have a question, or do you want to should I keep plugging ahead?
My question.
What's that?
You have my question.
I do have your question. Do you want me to read your question?
I will describe it and then you can read the exact question because I like how you added in there. Okay. We all have sort of things that we internalize, as women, we might have internalized misogyny. People in the LGBTQ community might have some sort of internalized homophobia. So what struck out to me, and then also to Jelena when we were kind of speaking about your book, was your own internal biases towards Black men and how you kind of combated that. So Jelena kind of took my question and added her little philosophical take to it. So I'll let her go ahead and expand.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's in the chapter on the uncomfortable truth about Black men and violence. And this is a very powerful chapter. And so one of the things you mentioned later on in the book is your experience at the Million Man March, which was, I believe you said, led by Louis Farrakhan. But you had this amazing experience there. And it seems like you said, like, that helped you. But do you also have tools like in the everyday to sort of, help you deal with the internalized racism, which you...
It's Yes, like that is something that is a daily struggle. And so, yes, and that, like, I think that the healthiest thing for me, like, is sort of like once I accepted that truth, yes, and then like it actually made like everything else easier, not easy, but easier. Yes, like, and because, yes, I think that like we actually like waste a lot of energy, sort of like actually trying to lie about ourselves. It's like, and sort of like actually trying to deny uh, sort of our thoughts and our feelings, etc. I mean, just because like we think that they are not good thoughts and feelings. And
Right.
I'm like, and yet though that like what I have learned like is that like the sort of like best way to like actually deal with those things like is to first accept them.
Mm.
Yes, yes, yes. And like for like example, excuse me, well, yes, in terms of how like it was about like 25 years like after like my so that oldest brother so like he actually went to prison for murder. Yes, and then that I'm like I was like actually 9 years old, at least like actually when that happened.
Mm.
And then sort of like 25 years later that I was like finally diagnosed with like PTSD, like actually from that event. I mean, yeah, so like I was like actually struggling with a bunch of really, really bad visions, etc.
Yeah.
That sort of actually got like really, really violent. Yes, like and I mean yes, and then that I mean, at least for sort of like much of that period that like I was like actually trying to literally sort of like actually shake those bad thoughts out of my head. And when I say literally, I mean literally, I mean like doing that. And yet though that like once I sort of like actually got like into counseling, yes, and then that yes, and then that like what we that gonna realize like was that like as long as I am trying to fight them, I mean yes, and then that sort of that like they sort of like actually will like only get stronger. And so like what you actually need to do like is just to accept that like they are there. And yes, and then yes, and then that at least like actually deal with those things like in a rational manner. Like which is the same thing that I sort of like actually do like with sort of how other forms of biases as well, that like I don't try to deny like that I have them. Yes, and then that like what I try to do is to accept them and then like actually try to adjust. Uh, uh, um, I mean, yes, and then that just to like actually make sure that I am actually not allowing those biases like in order to like actually lead to like ill treatment of other people.
Yeah, that seems really important. I remember the first time I learned about implicit bias, which was not that long ago. Um, I'm like, how come I didn't know about this ever? Because I was like,
Yes.
oh, I'm not openly biased, right? But then,
Right.
oh, we have all these implicit biases. And then you go to the Harvard website, which if nobody's
Yes.
done this yet, you should go and you do this implicit bias test. You're like, oh, crap.
Yes.
I am biased. And you're right that like, it's just like G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle, right?
Right.
Knowing
Yes.
it and then saying this is true. And it's
Yes.
not that it's your fault. This is the way that I think about it
Yeah.
now, that we were raised in a country that
Yes.
like gave us these stereotypes.
Right.
So like
Yes.
we all have them. We all know what
Yes.
they are. Just like
Yes.
we all know, what, I don't know, like who Kim Kardashian is,
Right. Exactly.
like,
Exactly.
like these are the
Exactly.
things that we know.
Yes.
So yeah, I completely agree with you that like just acknowledging your own internalized whatever negative thing is definitely the first step and very, very helpful. And you would be surprised, I would have been surprised about how many students resist this.
Yes.
So it
Yes.
takes some wisdom. I don't know if it's getting older that helps, but yeah.
Yes. Yes. And also And then that like these sort of like irony about that like is that my Christianity, like my like faith, like actually like helped to inform like that view like of this. Yes, like and because like at least for me, like actually at least like actually at least like actually when I think about the sort of like best parts about it, like is that like it really like actually tries like it actually tries to teach you like in order to accept who you are and also to like actually at least to like actually not judge yourself so harshly. Yes, like and because sort of at least like actually once you do that, yes, and then that yes, and then that yes, and then that like you are only like in like a great spot, like in order to like actually change. Uh, um, and yet, though, as you said, at least about those students, for instance, yes, and then that like as long like as you resist like at least like actually telling like the that truth about yourself. Yes, and then that it is going to take a lot longer, like in order for you to really, really change and mature and get better.
I agree with you. Totally.
It's like we do have a couple of questions and comments in the chat. And there were some folks kind of bringing up, you know, the idea that, you know, this was actually a while ago, we've gone on to a couple of topics, but, you know, like commenting maybe on, you know, how we can get past like an us versus them mentality, and then asking specifically about your recent op-ed in the New York Times, you know, quoted, I'm finally an angry Black man,
Yes.
and how that resonated with a lot of people. So those were
Yeah.
two comments that came up if you wanted to follow up on those.
Sure. Yes, and I saw actually got like a lot of feedback from like that one. I mean, like yes, like, and I sort of like actually felt I'm like compelled to like actually write it, simply because like I think that at a time like this, that like what we need like more than anything else is radical honesty. Mm-hmm. And so like for me, yes, in terms of like all this talk about unity versus division, et cetera, like all those sort of things, like I think that those kinds of talks sort of like actually miss the point. That's like, and because like I don't think that we can ever really be unified, and then that if we don't first tell our truths. Yes, I mean, so like actually starting there. Yes, and also sort of even if it is biting, like even if it absolutely actually offends other people, throws them off, etc., it is absolutely critical, like actually during this moment, like in order to be truthful. Yes, like I mean, yes, I mean, yes, like, and also that I sort of like actually have been doing like a lot of like soul searching like on these issues. I mean, yes, like, and because like I'm like actually trying to figure out how like where I got things right before, and also sort of how like where like I sort of actually got them wrong, like where like I was too rigid or sort of like too lenient, like all of those things that I am still like, actually trying to like at least like actually think my way through. And then that at least sort of I'm like at least like a part of it for sure is that like I know that I sort of like actually like took too long like in order to like actually recognize that sort of my anger itself is not a bad thing. Like it is not a bad thing. Like it is really about how it is you use it and why it is used.
I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Jelena, do you want to like kind of swerve into the trauma type question that you had? I think that would be a good one to break into now.
I would love to talk about that one. Okay. So I do my one of my areas of research is empathy and moral psychology. So I read a lot of books in psychology. So I was particularly interested in this chapter. So this is in a chapter in Isaac's book called The Truth About Black People and the American Dream, which is another good chapter. So one of the things that Isaac describes in this chapter is the physical, like bodily effects of racism and oppression, and how it is can be equivalent to the trauma of PTSD. And so I read this in a book called The Body Keeps the Score. I can't remember who the author is.
Yes.
You're familiar with it, Isaac.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. So, and what it describes is that the trauma that you experience as a child, it like layers on top of each other and it gets like embedded into your neurons. And so one of the things you just talk about your own trauma in your own life, and which is also detailed in your other book, My Brother Mookie.
Yes.
Yes. And so describes how you mentioned that one of the effects for you is dysfluency or stuttering.
Yes.
So how have you dealt with this in your lifetime? Obviously you're out there and writing and working. So.
Yes. And that my dad, my dad actually has been, like, I think that my like biggest challenge, and also like it has been my best teacher. Yes, and because like one of the things, like one of the like odd things about like my life, I guess, is that like you can like absolutely hear my experiences like every single time that I speak, like even if I'm not speaking about my experiences. And because that like this stutter that I am like fairly sure now like is like one sort of like manifestation like of that trauma, like actually from that early on in my life. Yes, and also that like I'm not saying that like that trauma sort of like actually caused my stutter. Like I am saying essentially that it absolutely sort of actually locked it in. Okay. And and sort of actually deepened it like for me. And also that and also that there too like is a reason at least like for me to believe that like this sort of like auto like immune disease like that I was diagnosed with like in like 2013 which almost killed me, like is also I'm sort of like a manifestation like of that trauma as well. Mm-hmm. And yet though that like there sort of like is no test that I can take like in order to like absolutely confirm those things. And yet though that like if you like actually look, if you actually look at the research on trauma, and then like it actually feels like very, very apparent to me. And also like one of the things that folks like really don't get either, like is that especially when they celebrate sort of like folks like who have like overcome a whole lot, and still succeed and achieve, etc. They say, oh yes, that's great, that's wonderful, etc. And yet though that like they sort of like absolutely do not realize that sort of like all those scars are still there. And also at least like actually what we found like in at least like in our 40s, 50s, and like 60s, like especially for like Black people that really and that like who have sort of like actually overcome yet though that like their sort of that rates of disease, like physical disease, like actually jumps up a whole lot. Yes. I mean, yes, it's like essentially like, and so like one of those books, yes, and sort of like maybe like even like in like the one that you mentioned, like there sort of like is like this concept like of like actually saying that the body never forgets.
Mhm.
Like which means that like all of that like trauma that a sort of like 9-year-old boy like is like actually dealing with right now, sort of actually will be with him like in 40 years as well.
Mhm. Yeah. And that seems to be totally consistent with all the research, right? That's done
Yes.
on PTSD and other
Right.
forms of trauma, is that it just, you would think. So one of the experiences, I mean, I haven't had that. I mean, I have had a number of traumatic events in my life, but I was in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit, and you would think
Yes.
that when you've gone through something like that, then when you have another hurricane, you'll just be like, I got this. I know how to do this.
Yeah.
And it's actually worse. It's like,
Worse.
oh no,
Exactly.
I have
Exactly.
to do this again.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So
Yes.
it's very interesting how that prior experience, it doesn't make things better. It
No,
actually
it doesn't.
is harder. So yeah, I totally, I find that interesting. Another thing that you were mentioning in the book about with the racism factor, which is factored into that, I teach a biomedical ethics class, and I think it's fairly clear from the literature that the stress that comes from living in a racist society is manifested
Yes.
in the body and in illness,
Yes.
and
Yes.
immune diseases like the one
Absolutely.
that you're describing. So I think the medical community is fairly, cognizant of the fact that racism has deleterious effects on it's not the fact that like there's something different about your body and therefore you're unhealthy. It's there's
Right.
a social cost,
Exactly. Yes.
which is
Exactly.
affecting the body and bringing about the negative, poor health outcomes, so which we're seeing
Yes.
during COVID. So
Yes. Yes, for sure.
it's tricky, very tricky. All right, so this is great. All right, we don't have a lot of time. Okay, so we have maybe 10 or so minutes left. Isaac, you started off as a journalist, and we have a couple of questions about journalism that we like to ask. So one question is about the relationship of journalism to activism.
Yes.
So I think it's really interesting to think about the role that a journalist plays in today's society, especially when there's so much fake news.
Yes.
And which actually I shouldn't even say fake news. It's like really fake news.
Really fake. Yes.
False fake news. And so what is the role of a journalist today in this media environment, which may be different than when you first started your career, I don't know, 20 years ago? How have things changed?
But yes, I mean, like they are drastically different. Yes. Yes, like, and at least like actually, like I was like actually talking to my students about this, like actually just yesterday. Yes, like, and because at least like actually when I graduated from Davidson in 1995, I had sent a total of 2 emails, like actually, my in 4 years at Davidson. Yes, and so like now, yes, I mean just 2 total emails the entire time I was at Davidson. Yes, so like that is a drastically different world like than the one that we are in now. Yes, like, and also that like that change like has like really affected like journalism. Yes, like, and because yes, like, and because like one that it is like actually blown up our like prior sort of like business model, like which was like all about like local ads and like real estate ads, etc. Yes, and then uh, 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 like which meant that we actually had to try to find like other streams of revenue, like actually, yes, like, and yes, like, and also sort of like actually through the internet, yes, like, and also sort of like which like actually made that difficult simply because like those kind of ad rates were lower, and yet though that I mean you can like actually earn more ad dollars if you got more eyeballs at least like actually to the screen.
Mm.
Yes, and then so like yes, and then so like essentially like in like that kind of that pressured environment. I mean yes, and then that like it actually made it like easier like in order to like actually pass off like really flimsy stories. Yes, like and also sort of like headlines, etc. Like that were like actually designed just to get more clicks and readership. Yes, like and also that like at least like I sort of actually used to joke that like if you actually put bikini and murder like in a headline like at like the Myrtle Beach like Sun News like online. I mean yes, and then like that would always get massive amounts of clicks. Like and yet though that like it would like actually really sort of like actually skew reality, like unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean yes, and then so like that like is like that actually yes in terms of like, that has been like the sort of like juggling act, and then like now yes I know that we are sort of like actually now sort of actually trying to get better like with those things and like actually yes like and like actually still like actually trying to get sort of yes in terms of sort of like meaningful stories like that absolutely matter now. Yes, yes, I think that we are like finally sort of like slowly sort of like actually trying to like actually balance those things out. Yes, me, but like those kind of pressures are still there, and also with the fact that especially with sort of like at least like actually with our like local sort of like outlets like actually have like much smaller staffs now, like which means that they are sort of like absolutely doing like even more work like than before. So like it's a struggle right now. It's a struggle.
Yeah. I can tell that it's definitely a struggle for the whole industry as it's going right now. I want to maybe ask you a sensitive question with respect to your time as a journalist or just reporting in Myrtle Beach in general. One of the things that you talk about in your book is the Julian Betton story, and his case was recently. I think he got the settlement.
Settled, yes, yes, like from Myrtle Beach. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So Isaac describes this story in his book where it's about this guy that like a SWAT team like invaded into his house and like shot him and paralyzed him. And so one of the things that you describe in the book is that there's been other stories where you've gone and there have been other Black people harmed at the hands of the police, but like it never makes it into the newspaper. It doesn't seem to me that there's a lot of like investigative journalism in Myrtle Beach. There doesn't seem to be a lot. I don't know if there's a reason for that. And I'm not sure how much we should talk about it publicly, but like, what's the deal with the way that things are covered in our area with respect to like racial issues? Like we had some people that were down at there was one of the marches for after George Floyd was killed in Myrtle Beach, and Ashlyn and I were involved in trying to help. We bailed people out of jail that had gotten arrested, and we heard stories from them and had video evidence of like how they had been treated by the police, and like nobody wanted to hear it.
Yes. Like well, and that too like absolutely has been one of the frustrating changes since yes, like, and because like I started like in that Myrtle Beach in 1997. I mean yes, and it's like back then like our newspaper like actually was the fastest growing like in the state, and also sort of like one of the fastest growing like in the nation, etc. Yes, and so like our sort of like staff like was that on it robust. Yes, like and also that like we actually like we actually had like a very good mix of like veteran reporters and young reporters and editors, et cetera. Yes, yes, and then that, like it actually made like those types of investigations like more possible to do. Yes, 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 yes. I mean, yes, and then like so, like right now, yes, I know again that so like actually like with like so many staff cuts, like it has been really, really difficult, like in order to like actually really be able to get like all of these big like stories like actually done well now. Like and yet though that I know that there are like serious like journalists in this area, yes, and that like who sort of like are sort of actually trying to do their best, like under like some really, really tough sort of like situations, like and also yes, like I know that recently, like actually like last year or something, that at least one new investigative reporter like was like actually hired over like at the Sun News, for instance. Yes, and then so like slowly, like we have like absolutely seen a reinvestment like in like kind of like in those kinds of things. But I think that it absolutely will like actually take a while at least like actually get rooted back in. Yes, like and also that like yes, that I can tell you right now that I know like of the story. Yes, in terms of like that, like if I was still at the Sun News, that I would definitely be investigating right now. Yes, like and because like it is like really, really serious and really, really important. And then that like I have like actually silently been a bit like frustrated that like it hasn't really been dealt with thoroughly yet. I mean, so like like I mean, yeah. So like I can definitely like at least I actually say that I feel the frustration. Yes, me. But I also know that like those journalists like in those newsrooms also like feel like that frustration simply because they have like so many different jobs like that they have to do all at once. And yes, and then that like that can be crushing.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And now you've really piqued my curiosity about this other story about what this is going on. But maybe we'll hear about this in another book, or maybe in the New York Times, or somewhere else. So this has been really amazing, Isaac. I'm trying to think if there's anything we want to wrap up on. I do want to mention there was one thing that I really enjoyed in Isaac's book. He has this great thought experiment, and philosophers love thought experiments, where you run this and you're like, what would be the equivalent of Trump running for president? And so I was this thought experiment of, well, it would be Louis Farrakhan running for president, because he's got some, biases and comments and things that are out there that a lot of people don't like. And then right, exactly. And then you say, but then Al Sharpton, he ran in 2004, and even South Carolinians didn't vote for him.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
So Isaac is basically saying, all right, Black people are not going to elect somebody like the equivalent of Donald Trump. So white people, y'all should not do it either.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I found that to be one of the most funny parts of not funny, but I mean, it's funny. There's lots of funny things in there. So I was definitely laughing. I thought that was really good. So So anyway, there's a lot of really good stuff in this book. I encourage you to read it if you get the chance. Obviously, you can find Isaac's work. I think I ran across something recently for CNN that you had written. So your work is out there and publicly accessible, and it's we're so excited that you're here with us in Myrtle Beach.
Oh, cool.
So
Cool.
yeah,
Cool.
this has been
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of
Yes.
course. We've had a wonderful time. So thank you again. And
Yes.
I've met your wonderful wife, Tracy, before. So tell her I
Yes.
said hello.
The Women's March.
Yes.
Yes, she
Oh,
spoke
yeah, that's
at
right.
our
Yes.
Women's March. Yes, 2 years
Yeah.
ago. And I was
Mhm.
like, can she run for president?
Yes, exactly. Me too. Me too. I tell her that too.
She run against Tom Rice first.
Seriously, I'm still trying to get her, well, she can, we got a whole fundraising if she wants to, run against Tom Rice. So this has been wonderful. So thank you, Isaac, and thank you, Ashlyn and Jamie, for helping me out with the comments. And thank you to all of our attendees and everybody online who's been participating in the chat. We've had a great time. And Issac Bailey, it's been great to have you tonight.
Right.
And
Yes.
thank you for sharing your thoughts with us tonight.
Cool. Yes.
All
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. All right. Bye.